I'm leading the Discovery Bioanalytical Labs, and we work with about 100 different project teams across the company. But we're kind of one smaller part of the overall bioanalytical labs, which team over there with Jen are involved in the clinical side of things. But I'll be talking today about the discovery research, kind of the early Wild West side of drug discovery, which then leads later to drug development. And it's a little bit of a tough act to follow. That was an excellent panel, like really fascinating, and they were hitting a lot of the key points. When the panel was talking about trust in AI, I kept flashing in my mind the picture of a self-driving car. So I want to trust the car because it's so convenient, and they are amazing today. You can really, but you still want to be able to put your hand on the wheel, and kind of you want to supervise that beautiful technology. So I think with empowering the user with that ability to supervise, we would I think all love to trust the AI piece. And the other point I thought that was really excellent was the focus at this point should be more on the sexiness of generating data, not on analyzing data. And that's an extremely difficult battle and Nick, you mentioned earlier things about generating data, using AI to improve the tools to generate data. And that's what would really accelerate us forward. And then the payoff, as was said in the panel, the payoff is cycle time. If a company can demonstrate that the time between milestones, like discover a new drug, get it past the tox stage, and then get it into development, get it into clinical trials, if the time between those milestones, it's constantly measured. All those metrics are known and tracked very closely. So if we see an impact of AI on the distance between those milestones, then all the companies are going to rush to these tools because they know they have to compete with the other companies doing the same thing. All right, so that's it. I'm done. Okay. All right. So today I'm going to tell the story of discovery bioanalysis, development of a discovery bioanalysis LIMS. And so I'll go through kind of the beginning of the story, what did we build and why? What were the kind of challenges, or as we're encouraged to think of challenges now as opportunities. So we don't use the word challenge, we use opportunity. And the kind of the struggles we went through to overcome, and the lessons learned, and then the eventual resolution and the outlook. So leveraging AI, I generated this image you see here, and it tries to address the question why we invested a lot of time and resource to replace what was a very wonderful tool, a legacy tool that was built up over probably 15, 20 years, which was perfectly adapted, like a very comfortable shoe or glove that's perfectly adapted to what we needed to do. But we realized we had to replace it because we knew that at any moment in time, and I'm trying not to be dramatic here, but I tell the truth, is at any moment in time, that tool could fail and it could be unrecoverable. And that means that we don't have our automation any longer for doing our workflows. And as with a lot of different businesses, but in the one I know, in the discovery bioanalytical business, the characteristics of those teams are a small number of people with a very large volume of work to do, and it's required that the data is delivered very quickly back to those decision-making project teams. And And it needs to be reliable and rugged and all those kind of things, and fair data as well. So we knew this legacy system, which we really liked a lot. But it could fail at any time. We had to replace it. So we went on this journey of building the new system, and that's really essentially what I'll talk about today. And I'll describe some of the challenges along the way, and those have been mentioned earlier today as well, and then some of the lessons learned. All right. Okay, so the opportunity is to proactively replace this highly capable system, and we chose to do this using the IDBS E-WorkBook and the advanced spreadsheets. And the result is very good. We have a nice system now, fully in operation, running all of our studies. It's delivering faster performance, improved capability, long-term IT support, all on a modern platform. So I'll just go a bit more in detail what we actually built and why. All right, so we called it BA SmartBook. That's our little term for our tool in Novartis, the BA SmartBook. And the technology is the E-WorkBook advanced spreadsheets. This is the way we use this was as a collection of linked spreadsheets. So all the different spreadsheets talk to each other immediately as data is updated. And then within the context of that BA SmartBook, that product or application was within an ecosystem, a kind of an application suite, which we called PKS Hub. And that ecosystem included different applications that were integrated to the bioanalytical tool. So upstream, we integrated to a new in vivo application that was being developed in the company and is now developed. So we could pull all that metadata, that really critical metadata that was talked about earlier, we can pull it right into the BA SmartBook. And then to downstream applications too, like if we need to send it to our instruments to analyze the samples, or maybe we need to, sometimes we'll outsource the study, so we need to send that study off to a CRO in some format. Yep. And again, the rationale was because we had this risk of really unrecoverable failure of the legacy system, which was built on Excel and Visual Basic 6 and all these older tools where any kind of critical Windows Office update could completely take it offline. All right, and we did this over the course of about 2019 to 2025. And during that journey, there were, as was also mentioned earlier, there were changes in what we needed to develop. And there were many conversations where we would come forward as a team and we would say, okay, we're doing well, we've got our user requirements and we're on track, but now we need this user requirement fulfilled. And this was universally unhappily received by leadership, because now it's more cost, more time, and they're like, well, why didn't you know this 5 years ago that you needed to build this new capability for this new business model that hadn't been thought of 5 years ago? And that's just the way it worked. And similar with Jen, this was done in Basel, Switzerland, and in Cambridge, and we've also extended this to California, to our San Diego site. All right. So, echoing earlier presentations, here I'm kind of showing that DMTA, or Design, Make, Test, Analyze cycle. And also talking here about, within that cycle, in the kind of BA mission, and especially in Discovery BA, is we need to be very fast and be fit for purpose with data quality and reliable. So we're talking 2 days, 3 days, 5 days to turn around the data. And there's a very large number of studies that we need to process. And all of this, the purpose of doing all this is to be able to quickly essentially change those brand new molecules that are just been imagined recently by chemists or biologists into potential medicines and hand them off to our clinical colleagues to do the clinical work. And that cycle of DMTA involves many matrix teams. So, we'll have we're constantly collaborating with the in vivo team, the chemistry team, or the biologics team. So, that are more upstream, and then some of the teams that are downstream, like the outsourcing teams and the project teams who work with all the data that we've produced and kind of gain insights from that data. And as I was mentioning before, with that PKS Hub ecosystem, the goal of that PKS Hub application suite was to integrate the applications used by those different teams. So you've got an application used by the in vivo team, and they're an entirely separate team than us in the bioanalytical team. But we need to have, in the same way that we collaborate as people and scientists, we also need our software tools to collaborate and integrate with one another. And that process of integration was actually one of our biggest challenges. There's one thing to build a product and build an application within a bioanalytical tool, but then we also, at the same time, we're needing to integrate it to other tools. All right. And then this fictitious data table shows kind of a very simple example of how that looks. And you can see highlighted in the upper section are the different teams, some of the different teams. So chemistry team, in vivo team, and so on. And the data table itself, that's sort of the base fair data that we're producing. Clearly, this is a very simple example, but that's the data that we're sending into the company database. And then that's being used as the foundation for doing the additional data processing, like determining the PK curves and the exposure of the compound. How rapidly is the compound cleared from an in vivo system? What's the exposure level? Because the more compound you're getting into an in vivo system or into a certain target tissue, then it's potentially a better drug because it's getting into the right places. So in the table, you can see the chemistry contribution. They produce the compound with the compound sample ID. And then you've got the in vivo team who are providing all that nice metadata and the samples, which without the samples, we have nothing to do. And then we contribute our kind of raw data, like the concentration data gets added to this in the context of the metadata. And then finally, the project team will look at that process data, and they'll compare the different compounds and the different dosing regimes, and they'll see, oh, okay, so this compound has better exposure than this compound, or this one cleared very quickly, so we're going to move away from this compound towards this other compound. All right. So this is how, zooming out a bit, this is how it looks in terms of, on the left is the old legacy system, which we called MapHub. That went from 2008 to 2025. And this tool was not very integrated, but it did have several capabilities all kind of built within one application as one tool. But it had no integration to the portfolio or to our outsourcing applications downstream. So on the right-hand side is the more integrated new PKS Hub environment. And there, we begin with the in vivo piece, creating the study request from the project team and executing the in-life. and then importing all that metadata right into the BA SmartBook, and then either doing the analysis internally or sending it to our CRO, getting that nice data set, a nice fair digital data set, and then updating the portfolio, that we're, where we are with the portfolio. All right, how am I doing on time? Good, all right. So this gives some additional context of this business environment. And as I was saying earlier, that there could be a team of 5 people running 1,000 studies in a given year. They could be analyzing all types of compounds. So in the bioanalytical world, the what we call the modality of the compound is very, very key. It's a big decision driver. So if it's a fairly well-behaved rule of 5 small molecule compound, then the analytics of that are, not always straightforward, but on the more straightforward side, and they can be run fairly quickly. But if it's a trifunctional antibody or an antibody drug conjugate that was mentioned earlier today, then the complexity levels are increasing. And then we need to factor in more time to do the work, and we need to adapt the tools to be able to work with, for example, instead of working with an LCMS, now we'll be working with a PCR system, or maybe a ELISA LBA system. So we've got to be able to speak to different types of instruments and handle these different types of compounds that are coming through the system. And all of this is contributing to this need to be agile, to respond quickly to new business models and be able to still deliver that data in a reliable way. In the middle there, you can see the assay scope, these kind of classical PK, PKPD type of assays that we run. And they go all the way from very simple assays to, you wouldn't believe the level of complexity of, well, you probably would, of some of these, especially the pharmacology studies. You can have many groups, many different compounds, different dose levels, and it's a good thing because the scientists are being creative and they're coming up with different ways to really unlock that target and those compounds, and they're doing it for very good reasons. It does result in a lot of complexity to be able to then translate that multi-group, multi-compound study where compounds are being dosed 3 times a day, every other day, except for the last day. And with this exception that might happen towards the end with this animal, all that has to be incorporated into the metadata and the way we analyze the samples, so that when we send that data back to the team, when we give that concentration for sample 7, it's correlated exactly with animal number 1 at time point 1 hour. And all the context is there to properly interpret that data. And the value added is it's faster than the legacy solution. It's agile for assay scope and the new business models. We got improved integration, and we're able to work with new modality compounds, and it's this modern technology. All right. So the opportunity is, as said, is to kind of proactively replace this highly capable but outdated system with this modern, globally supported solution. And the kinds of challenges I heard echoed earlier today, we also found, and even the level of significance of the opportunity aligns very well, unsurprisingly. So communication was like the number one thing. And how do I, as a end user, have for a software feature? And coming into it not being trained, we didn't know in the beginning how to properly make a specific actionable request to software development team But then we learned over time, how to do this better and more effectively. And just that alone, just that little example of communication, that's months of time. That's speeding up the whole development of the software hugely. Governance, how we engage with leadership, stakeholders, that was also a very big part. Like with a lot of teams, there was limited resource. And with the IT technology choice, that went relatively smoothly. We had a good discussion around that and good engagement, and landed on this IDBS E-WorkBook back in 2019. So that was good. All right, so I'll just focus on a few focal points of communication, governance, the magnitude of the challenge. So going into it, we probably went in a bit naively, thinking in a couple of years we're gonna have this wonderful tool, and we'll be replacing our old system. And for leadership, it was actually more like a year or less than a year. We could make this wonderful tool. Not the reality. So here's just a short, again, AI-generated cartoon on the upper two panels. This is, kind of me in the beginning, not properly phrasing the request for the feature that I wanted. This is just create a task list in a table. And the developer very faithfully created that feature. And then when it was reflected back to me how it worked, or the fictitious person in the slide, that person realized, oh, this is not actually what I wanted. And so they went to iteration 2, and then the user, gave them a much more specific, well-constructed request for that feature. And then the developer was able to produce that tool. And just in this simple example, you could see if it had been done more effectively in the beginning, that's already a doubling of speed. It's just one cycle to get that feature. And then multiply that by 1,000 and many features. It's a lot. And then on governance, so this table kind of looks at on things like, on the left-hand side is the earlier part of the project, where, from the leadership perspective, we had some meetings, some steering committees, but it was rather ad hoc and incomplete representation of the key stakeholders. As I said before, we had especially a lot of challenges with getting the teams, the product team, or getting the integrations between different products to be also under active development while those teams were developing software within the products. So it's part of that thinking of moving outside of just your own interests to what's the greater good? How can we develop this together so that all the ships are rising at the same time? And our in-life application and our bioanalytical application are developing together, and also the integration between the two is developing at the same time, so the two can speak to one another. Project management was reasonable in the beginning, but not resourced enough and not fully structured like it was later. The communications were kind of one of the issues with the communications was we went in naively and we thought a couple of years we're going to have this fabulous tool. And so we sort of, I think the phrase is you're supposed to under-promise and over-deliver, I think is what you're supposed to do. But we over-promised and under-delivered. So needless to say, there was some frustration. And we had to work through that. But later we learned all these things. The leadership team got very well organized, and we had good collaboration between the different products, so they could work on the integration between those tools. And then we had a really great structure for the project team. So we had our end users, our software developers, and the engineering teams from the company working with IDBS and ZIFO and our own software group and ourselves as a team. And it all just kind of came together nicely towards the later phase. And the communications became very nice and clear. We went to a single point of contact style of communication, because one of the other characteristics we found throughout the process is misunderstanding. So there'll be a lot of miscommunication and people getting information from different places, and that was causing problems because people would have different understandings of where we were and would be trying to influence things based on that misunderstanding. Yeah, so that all worked out well towards the later phase, and the project team became very productive and energized there. And yeah. And then kind of how we responded to the opportunities. As I said, at the time we were too optimistic. We overpromised and underdelivered. The approach we took to the governance and the communication was kind of more of a trial and error type of an approach. I think in retrospect, and I'll talk a bit about lessons learned, but really it would have been better we did do some training, but it would have been better to invest significantly more time in the beginning in training on everybody involved. How do we do this? How do we work together? How do we describe a good user requirement? That kind of thing. The technology platform choice was good. That went well, and we all aligned on that. All right. So the lessons learned, we realized we need to put in safety margins in estimating the resourcing needs for these things, the budget and the time. It's important to push back on the unrealistic expectations that may be there. So if leadership is saying you've got to get this done in 2 years, we have to stand up and say, well, realistically and based on talking to people who've done this before, we know it's going to take 4 years. And we just have to be firm about that. Seeking out the voices of experience, people who've done this kind of thing before, that's very beneficial so that we don't keep repeating the mistakes of the past. The governance was very well structured. There was this single point of contact. We established a well-designed leadership team and good steering committees. Communication, the most challenging piece, became very effective. We got good, effective communications and good communications with leadership and across leadership teams to mitigate misunderstandings. So those things all smoothed out. And the last piece I'll say is, and I'm sure everyone here has experienced this, but software development, I don't know what it is about software development, not that we wrote any code or anything, but we were just part of that team, but it's a very intense and emotive process. And I don't know how else to say it just is. And people get very engaged in it. It's almost existential. So having all these good trainings in place and good communications greatly improved that scenario and brought things to a much better, rational, calm way of doing things. And then here we chose the technology. So we have on the top, you can see in the little tables on the 3 choices on the top, you can see some of the data we used to make the choices between these different options. Option 1 that we chose was the IDBS SmartBook E-WorkBook with advanced spreadsheets. We looked at Watson. Watson is the gold standard for especially for clinical bioanalytics. It's an incredibly good tool, but it's a little more difficult to integrate, and it's a little bit less agile for all those different wild types of study designs I was talking about earlier. Would be much harder to kind of implement in a very kind of more fixed type of Watson style system. And then the legacy solution, we could not stay with that because of the security issues. We just had to move on. All right, so lessons learned, we increased the safety margins, we improved project team efficiency, We built well-structured project teams, and well-organized leadership led to a good stakeholder management. And a lot of these things, it looks like, in retrospect, well, why didn't we do that in the beginning? Kind of a thing. You can easily say that, but at the time, you don't really think how important these things are. And if we had invested, I don't know, even 6 months in the beginning, just really focusing on the way of working and learning how to project manage and how to set up these different stakeholder management teams, would have accelerated the project in the end. We would have gotten a better solution faster if we had done that. All right. So then coming to the resolution. So this is the kind of schematic of the BA SmartBook with the advanced spreadsheets, and you can see in the gray in the middle are some of the different perspectives that we built. So these will be familiar to people work with these workflows, where we looked at the setup was what we imported from the in vivo study, from the in vivo tool. And then we had nice in vivo metadata. We could generate our sequence list to send out to the analytical instrument, gather the raw data from the instrument, pull it back in, review, and then send maybe a few samples back out to have them reanalyzed if they didn't pass the acceptance criteria, and then bring it back in, do the reporting, publish the data to the company database. So now it can be used by all the teams around Novartis to do their drug discovery and development. And at the same time, being well integrated to the other applications. All right. And then this just shows a bit more fine-grained detail of the workflow, where on the middle panel, you can see that within this workflow, we begin with this request for a study, and then we go to importing the in vivo data, and go on through to the gray boxes where we're sending information out to the instrument, getting data back from the instrument, and then bringing it back in and completing with this upload of fair data to the system, which then the nice newly developing AI tools can do all kinds of fun things with. This is the bigger picture. So this is the whole PKS Hub ecosystem. Starting in the upper left, we're going from the in vivo application over at the top to the BA SmartBook, and then continuing the circle around to get data into the company database, enable this AI and machine learning, to most importantly give that project team insights to be able to better and faster discover new drugs. So they can do things more quickly and better. And so the outlook, and I've been noticing during this whole day that a lot of the questions or points I had or things I was bringing up in the slides have already been addressed by people earlier in the day. Even my sticker has been answered, which is nice, but but this is perhaps a naive vision, but a vision of, can we, as an industry, as a pharmaceutical industry, can we align to a common set of, we are doing it, but can we do it more quickly, align to a common set of standards? And the workflows are identical between the different companies. It's just a different package or a different name or a different set of vocabulary, but it's all really the same thing happening. So there's no reason for us to invent 500 different wheels at all the different companies. We can just build the wheel together and everybody wins. So that's what we would hope for with this one BA vision. And to that end, and again, this was also addressed earlier from Nick and others, is we really need to be able to have a faster cycle time to build these next generation tools that are more and more effective, because as those tools come online, this means our lab data workflow can be even better and really accelerate drug discovery. And that is key because the patients are waiting. for these new medicines. That's it. Thank you. Big thank you to all the team, and I see some people are here, Daniel over there, massive help to us, and others involved. Anne was involved. A lot of people were involved, but there's a very good team, and that's it. Done. Yeah.
Okay, well, we've got time for questions. Just a few minutes.
Oh, I hoped I'd gone too long for questions.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Any questions for Daniel? Oh, this is Ralph.
How do you manage the change management for the end users, going from a highly customized legacy system to a system which might be seen not as user-friendly as before?
Yes, that was very, very challenging. Because the software is so emotive, people had worked with this software for 15 years and built it with their own blood, sweat, and tears. But we had a very good global connection across our team with the Switzerland and the Basel and the Cambridge sites, and good connections between our leadership and our people in the lab. And so we took the time to talk to them and explain what is the risk. We could be blacked out tomorrow. We could completely lose functionality, and there was a lot of good trust there, and the team realized that we had to all pitch in to do this process. So it was good leadership and good teams who were thinking in a data-driven way and a collaborative way that allowed it to happen. Yeah.